Welcome to the Sports Note for Tuesday, March 11th. And boy, did the NFL new calendar year get off to a bang. We actually saw several surprising names cut. We actually could be seeing a few more. We saw some massive contract signings, and several of those by the Buffalo Bills. So for all of the Josh Allen getting the largest contract in NFL history, for all of the Greg Rousseau getting signed to a 4-year extension with the Bills, for all of the Cleveland Browns signing Myles Garrett to the largest non-quarterback contract in NFL history. The team who actually had one of the more interesting and surprising, and albeit in a good way, first couple of days of free agency and as the previous calendar year closed out, were the Seattle Seahawks. And the Seahawks really got the ball rolling very late last week when it was announced that starting quarterback Geno Smith was going to be moved to the Las Vegas Raiders in exchange for the Raiders' third-round pick coming up next month, which is 92nd overall. It definitely works out well for the Raiders because they get an established veteran in Smith, who's 34 years old, and right now their only other option at that point was Aiden O'Connell. So as the Raiders could also be looking to maybe draft a quarterback at some point next month in the first few rounds, it definitely makes sense for them to go out and get a guy like Smith who's a game manager, and be able to kind of use him as a bridge, much like teams like Cleveland could be doing with acquiring Kenny Pickett in exchange for Dorian Thompson-Robinson and a late round pick themselves, where Pickett can compete with the starting job with whichever veteran they bring in, whether it could be Kirk Cousins and also whatever rookie they plan on drafting, whether it's Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, whether they wait until the second or third round and maybe take a guy like a Jackson Dart, a Quinn Ewers, a Will Howard, but Smith to the Raiders does make a lot more. It does make quite a bit of sense for both sides, because now it gets even more interesting as the Seahawks then move DK Metcalf, the star wide receiver, to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a second-round pick next month. And the other terms of that were Metcalf was then signed to a 5-year, $150 million extension by the Steelers, who really right now, with the unconfirmed report until everything can now be, pen can be put to paper and ink can be dry, that the Steelers right now are planning on running Russell Wilson back out there, with Justin Fields signing with the Jets for 2 years, but the Steelers and Seahawks then both flip 6 and 7 round picks this year. So now you've got the Seahawks, who have their own one. They've got 2 2s and 2 3s next month. But the most surprising of all of them was the one that I thought was going to actually roll a lot of the dominoes for what the quarterback class was going to look like, coming up in free agency here. And that's when the Seattle Seahawks announced that Sam Darnold was signed to a 3-year, $100.5 million deal with $55 million guaranteed. The even more surprising than them releasing veteran wide receiver Tyler Lockett. So you'd have to think that they saw something with the way that Darnold played in Kevin O'Connell's scheme last year that allowed Minnesota to win 14 games and finish right behind Detroit in the NFC North division, where Detroit gets bounced in the first round. Minnesota advances to the second round. But it's definitely something that the Vikings had to sit back and think about, because there were talks that could they re-sign Darnold long-term and possibly move J.J. McCarthy, their number one pick from 2024, who missed the entire season with a torn meniscus and surgery. Could they possibly be fielding offers for McCarthy? Could Cleveland possibly have come calling? Could the Raiders have come calling and maybe offered up their first round pick because essentially McCarthy, didn't even play. I don't even think he played a game in training camp last year. He got hurt very early in training camp, and the Vikings drafted him to apparently be the heir apparent to Kirk Cousins, and then they were expecting Darnold to be a bridge to be able to kind of keep their heads above water, and then turn the team over to McCarthy and just see where they can go, especially with all of their weapons. In Jordan Addison, in Justin Jefferson. So the idea of Seattle going out and grabbing Darnold, who, quite honestly, we all thought that what he did in Minnesota last year really showed that in the right system, he can be a very, very capable quarterback. But it was also his last opportunity that he was probably going to get as a legitimate NFL starter for the foreseeable future. We all saw that, Geno Smith started out, as a starter, rode the pine for a few years, started with the Jets, rode the pine, and then flourished in Seattle with their changeover after Pete Carroll leaves, after Russell Wilson gets traded, the whole franchise is in flux. And oh yeah, the Seahawks won 10 games with Geno Smith last year. The Seahawks finished mathematically tied with the Rams atop the NFC West, but legitimately lost out on a tiebreaker based off of strength of schedule and also head-to-head meeting. When you look at their numbers from last year, they were basically identical. The Seahawks had a plus 7-point differential. The Rams were a minus 19. They had identical 4-2 records within the NFC West division. They had identical 6-6 conference marks, but it also came down to the head-to-head matchup. Each team won one of the games, and then the Seahawks had a 5-point win, 30-25 in Week 1 in LA. The Rams had a 6-point win in Week 9 in Seattle. So do the, for you math majors out there, that's a 1-point differential in the head-to-head. So the Rams won the division. You could take strength of schedule. You could take all of this into account. But legitimately, it all boils down to the Rams, won the season series by 1 point. So you have to think with Darnold going to Seattle, there were rumors, flying around of teams asking for McCarthy. They were actually, but nobody was really going to entertain the idea of McCarthy until Minnesota figured out what they were going to do with Darnold. Were they going to invest in him long term? If they did, McCarthy could be expendable because you're not going to take a top 15 pick and basically ride him on the pine for the next several years. This is not a situation where you've got, the heir apparent playing behind a future Hall of Famer, much like you had with, I'm just throwing this out there, certainly with Brett Favre playing, Aaron Rodgers playing behind Brett Favre, Steve Young sitting behind Joe Montana, even though we all know that Steve Young was originally drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But you I hope you understand where I'm coming from with this. If you draft a guy that high, you kind of expect him to be the cornerstone of your franchise going forward. We saw that all 5 of these 6 quarterbacks that were taken first in the first round last year all had legitimate success. Bo Nix got to the playoffs, even though the Broncos crapped the bed, in their opening round playoff game. But the idea that McCarthy not having played but was getting so much love and rub from Vikings brass coaching staff, and even his and even his soon to be teammates as a rookie, just showed really how he had the potential to kind of elevate here. Now let's actually see what happens, in his first full year. Hopefully he doesn't have any setbacks here. Otherwise this whole thing blows up in Minnesota's face. But with Seattle, their depth chart right now, you've got Darnold at quarterback, and their backup is Sam Howell, who was a high round pick a few years ago. And then with receivers, you've got Jalen Darden, you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, the stud from Ohio State. You've got Derek Young, you've got tight end Noah Fant. So there's certainly some capability. Their running back situation, you've got Kenneth Walker the third, you've got Zach Charbonnet, Kenny McIntosh, kind of going right down the pipe here. So if Seattle can actually get maybe bring another free agent running back into there to kind of solidify their receiver room is okay, and there's certainly room to grow in. And Smith and Jigba certainly has the potential to break out. Let's actually see what he does in year 2 now that he's got a guy like Darnold throwing to him, because let's also be honest, the last 2 times that Darnold was under center, Minnesota did not have the best outcome. The Vikings lost 31-9 in the regular season finale to the Lions in Detroit, which would have actually not only decided the NFC North, but would have given the number 1 overall seed in the NFC. We actually saw that the Lions came out flat and then were stunned and kind of run off the field in the second half, let's be honest, against the Washington Commanders, who went all the way to the NFC title game. With their playoff game, they lose 27-9 in Los Angeles. Darnold throws for 245 yards, but has a net of significantly less than that, where he was sacked 9 times. And no, I'm not going to do the Ferris Bueller for that, but it reduces his net down to 163 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And again, the Rams win that game going away 27-9. So certainly, there were a lot of people that were already starting to talk, is this what Darnold can do, in big games? Does he actually fold like a cheap card table? Let's actually see what happens now, because Matt Stafford comes back for another 2 years with the Rams, but also, the Rams are going to be either trading or releasing Cooper Kupp, so there actually goes a massive, a massive outlet for Stafford in terms of his options. He still has Tyler Higbee. He still has Puka Nacua, who's going to be probably looking to get paid here in the next, in the next year or two, if he actually keeps his trajectory going. But with the Seahawks, you'd have to think that the 49ers are getting ready to retool. Brock Purdy's getting ready to be paid. The Arizona Cardinals are still going to be the bottom feeders of that division, essentially kind of by default at that point, as, Seattle's got themselves at a bit of a crossroads. Do they actually slip back to where the 49ers are? Do they fall behind the 49ers? Or do they possibly be able to concoct and replicate what they could get out of what O'Connell got out of Darnold last year, and be able to move forward and try and push past the Rams, knowing that the Rams, as much as they're getting younger with guys like Nacua, their draft picks in recent years, the guy under center is still 37 years old, whereas the Seahawks are now running out a 27-year-old who's got signed to a 5-year contract, and they're basically locked in now. And this was a team that after Russell Wilson got moved, they decided to stay with Geno Smith rather than go out and get somebody in the draft last year, where all signs were really targeting them grabbing Bo Nix, who played at Oregon. So you would have been able to draw a lot of that Oregon fan base, up to Seattle, 3, 4, 5 hour drive, depending on where you were in the state, as the Portland Trail Blazers are the only professional team in the state of Oregon, in the Big Four, and Seattle starting to blossom here, and make resurgence with the Kraken, the Mariners, and a lot of the promise that the Mariners seem to have every year, but this is going to be very hit or miss, and I believe this is also going to be a scenario in Seattle where we're going to be able to tell. We're not going to have to wait until 2-3 years to see if this pans out. It's it's definitely a crossroads for Darnold. He goes out, he has this great year in Minnesota, but now we have to see if he's a system quarterback or if something woke up inside him to where now he's under a different system and different leadership. He's now playing, he's not playing in a dome anymore. He's actually playing out on the West Coast where it's open air. It's going to be soggy for a good portion of the season with their home games. They do play on turf. So let's actually see, what 2025 holds before we actually start thinking, did we make a mistake and now we're locked into this guy until 2030? So let me know what you guys think. Where do you see the Seahawks ending up this year? What do you think of this move? Is there another move that kind of scratches your head? Who do you actually see possibly getting moved outside of what we talked about a second ago with Cooper Kupp possibly getting released? Are there other names that are on your radar? Who do you guys actually predict with the draft? And I will be back with you guys very, very soon. Wise Guys Sports Show Sunday night. We will actually have our March Madness bracket picks for both the men's and the women's. We hope you'll join us. Take care.